Okay, remove it. There we go. Hopefully everything is clear. Let us get started. So we are on the new Masechta. Mazel tov to everyone for finishing Avodah Zarah last week. Charlie and I were discussing, it's around a week and 2 days until we finish Seder Nezikin, which is really a big, big deal. So I hope we could find a way to celebrate it. But I guess more to discuss. But we're not there yet. We got a week more plus of Horayot, and today we're up to, I'm pretty sure the second to last Mishnah on Daf Daled on Mabet, which is not the last one, but 6 lines from the bottom. So let's get started. It says the Mishnah, Haru Beit Din Shogegin, right? Beit Din make a mistake in their ruling. They make a ruling that says that someone's allowed to say, eat chelev, is our classic example. Right, and they make a mistake. They don't realize that they're doing it wrong. Vasu kol ha'kahal shogegin. All the people do the thing wrong. They eat, say, the fats by mistake, and then they realize their error. Mevi and par. That is where you bring a par helam davar shel tzibor. But obviously that's the obvious case. But if it's mizidim vasu shogegin, if Beit Din does it by mezid, meaning Beit Din knows that what they're doing is wrong, and for whatever reason they decide to do this thing anyways, right? Which would be very unusual, but there's some circumstance. Then, and the people don't realize that. The people don't know that Beit Din is fooling them. Then mevin kispa osira. Then it's like any shogeg. Each individual person has to bring a keves or a sa'ir, like if someone was mechal Shabbat by mistake, because there's no tzibor that made a mistake. If, let's say, the people did it, the Beit Din did it shogegim, v'asum mizidim, the people said, we know Beit Din is wrong. They're clearly misreading this. But, Beit Din said we're allowed to eat basar b'chalav, so let's go for it. Let's go have a cheeseburger. But they did it on purpose. They don't bring a karban because you never bring a karban for something that you knowingly did wrong. Says the Gemara, shogegim v'asum mizidim. The Mishnah said a case of where Beit Din said it was shogeg, and people did it b'mezid, and you're harei l'peturim. Hash shogeg dumya demezid chayav. But if you did it b'shogeg, similar to doing it b'mezid, you'd be chayav. Hey chidami, what's the case? Shehoru Beit Din shechelev mutar v'tchalep lo b'shuman v'achlu. Let's say Beit Din comes and they say to you, look, chelev is mutar. You're allowed to have these fats that are normally prohibited. And you recognize that what Beit Din said is wrong. So you're not relying on Beit Din. Not clear. Let's say you're not relying on Beit Din, but you go to the store and you say, I'm not going to eat the fats, right? I'm going to eat the shuman. I'm going to eat the permitted part of the animal. And you buy the shuman, you go home and you eat it. And it turns out that it's the fats. So you ate what Beit Din said you're allowed to eat, but not because you were relying on Beit Din, right? You did it because you thought you were eating something else. So in that case, you might think that you are patur, kamashma from our Mishnah, that you are chayav, because in that case, there was a shogeg of Beit Din, there was a shogeg of the individual, and therefore together you're chayav. Tana seifa shogegin. So therefore, where am I? I skipped some words. So it says, so this seems to clarify for us the question that Rami Bar Chama had in Masechet Kritot. Where am I? Rami Bar Chama's question, we don't quote it here in our Gemara. The Rami Bar Chama's question in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, in Kritot, is that if a person, remember, does a sin, b'shogeg, they are chayav v'chatat. If they do it on purpose, they're chayav karet. Let's say a person sits down and they forget 2 halachot, right? They forget that you're not allowed to have blood and you're not allowed to have chelev, let's say. And they eat something and they don't know which one it is. So meaning they did a prohibition, they did it by mistake, but they don't know what mistake they did at that time. So it wasn't clear to them at that time. So there's a question in the Gemara like I said, there's a question in the Gemara in Kritut about whether you're chayav for that or not chayav for that. Meaning, do you have to know at the time that you're doing it which aveira you're doing wrong? Our Mishnah implies that you don't. That if you did a mistake and you didn't realize why it was a mistake, it wasn't because of Beit Din, it was because of you mixed up the meat, it would still be chayav a karban. So this seems to clarify what Rami Bar Chama asked. Says Rami Bar Chama, not necessarily. Amar L'cha, he would tell you, Misham the Tana Reisha mizidin masu shogegin, Tana Sefer shogegin masu mizidin. Stop being so exacting in our Gemara, right? The reality is that the reality is that the reason that we say this language is not necessarily to teach you something else. It's there just because we want to parallel the beginning of the Mishnah. So it's not something that you can necessarily learn from in the Mishnah. It really just says it that way because that's the way it said everything else, basically. So that is our Mishnah. Continues the next Mishnah, now 2 lines from the bottom. This is a very long Mishnah, which will clarify many, many things. We've referenced every part of this Mishnah, or most of it, already in the last 3 days. Haru Beit Din vasu kol kal ruban, right? Beit Din makes a psak. So a very simple psak. Beit Din says you're allowed to eat, food that's really not allowed to eat. Let's say blood, dam. They can't be matir the whole mitzvah, right? The whole avera, but part of it. So the horem miksat mutar, part of it is aser. And the whole kahal, o ruban, meaning or a majority of the kahal, acts inappropriately al pihen, based on the psak of Beit Din. So this is the classic case of par helam davar shel tzibur. The Beit Din paskins, you're allowed to eat something. Most of the nation or all of the nation does the act. Says the Mishnah, miviyin par. Then you bring a par. Now, who brings the par? So our Mishnah gets into this big discussion, which we've referenced before, as to who is chayav for the par helam davar shel tzibur. Is it the Beit Din, because the people did it, or is it the people, or is it both? So says the Mishnah, the Beit Din brings a par. And bavodat kochavim, if the sin was related to idol worship, then miviyin par v'sa'ir. You bring a par and a sa'ir, and we'll get into this in more detail, but that's based on the psukim, of course, that you bring those 2 karbanot, divrei Rabbi Meir. So the responsibility is 1 karban on the Beit Din, or 2 karbanot if it's avodah zarah. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, I completely disagree. Yud bet shvatim miviyin, yud bet parim. The responsibility is on the shevet. And the shevet, or the people of the shevet, have to each bring a par, meaning each shevet collectively brings a par. If all 12 shvatim of Klal Yisrael did this, then each shevet brings its own par. So there's 12 parim, and if it's avodat kuchavim, miviyin yud bet parim b'shem asar seirim. They bring 12 and 12. So the responsibility is not on the Beit Din, it's on the community. And each community, and by community here we mean shevet, brings 1 par. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, top of Daf Hey Amud Aleph, in fact, Yud Gimel, you bring 13 because there's both. There's responsibility on the individual shevet and on the Beit Din. And so Yud Gimel parim, ubavadam kachavim shlosha asar parim, shlosha asar seirim. Par v'sa'ir l'chol shevet v'shevet. A par or a sa'ir and the sa'ir if it's avodah zarah for every shevet, and par v'sa'ir the Beit Din, and 1 for the Beit Din that gave the psak. So you basically have both Rabbi Meir's opinion and Rabbi Yehuda's opinion together. Horu Beit Din v'asu shiva shvatin aruban. Now let's say, this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced. Beit Din gives a psak, and they say, everyone in Bnei, this is the central Beit Din, everyone can eat fats that are really prohibited to eat. And not everyone does it, but 7 shvatim, which is a majority of the shvatim, even though it's not a majority of the people in this case. Oh, ruban. The Rashi here says, implies that ruban means rov of the shvatim, right? And Rashi here says that the 7 shvatim are a rov. So the 7 shvatim are a majority of Klal Yisrael. Then, and they act al pihen. So in this case, again, not every shevet participated, but the majority of shvatim participated. So then, mivi'im par, right? They bring 1 par. This is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Since it wasn't everybody, we're going to clarify this more in the Gemara. They bring a par. Avada kuchavim mivi'im par v'sa'ir. Sorry, different Rabbi Meir. Take it back. We're not Rabbi Shimon yet. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So again, the situation here is that 7 shvatim did it. Rabbi Meir's opinion was that even if every single person did it, you would bring 1 par. The same thing, of course, is true over here. But Rabbi Yehuda here says, unlike earlier where I said you bring 12 parim, here is Sheva Shvatim Shechatu Miviin Sheva Parim. The 7 tribes that sinned bring together, meaning each tribe brings 1 par, they bring 7 parim. But Shar Shvatim Shalochatu Miviin Aidem Par. Not the other tribes that didn't sin also bring a par. So basically, because, again, we're going to explore this all in the Gemara, but because a majority of the Shvatim did this thing wrong, every Shevet has to bring a par. Because even the tribes that did not sin have to bring a karban because of the tribes that did sin. And again, we'll see in the Gemara, but this is because it's a majority of the tribes. Rabbi Shimon says, I disagree, and it should be 8 parim in this case. Shmona parim. Because par b'sa'ir l'chol shevet v'shevet, each shevet that sinned brings a par if it's a regular sin, or a par and a sa'ir if it's avodah zarah, and a par b'sa'ir lebeit din, and one for beit din. But Rabbi Shimon disagrees about the responsibility of the other tribes that didn't sin. So according to Rabbi Meir, there's only one animal, which is always the case. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there's 12, because every tribe has to bring, because a majority of the tribes did it wrong. And according to Rabbi Shimon, it's just the tribes that did it wrong that bring, and one for Beit Din. Now, the last case in the Mishnah is, what if the Beit Din is not the central Beit Din, but it's a Beit Din of one Shevet? So Haru Beit Din sha'achad min hashvatim. So it wasn't the central court, it was the Shevet court that gave a wrong psak. V'asa oto ha-shevet al pihen, and that Shevet did the thing, or the majority of the Shevet did the thing wrong according to the psak of the Beit Din. Oto Shevet hu chayav. So then that Shevet has to bring a karban. Mishar kol hashvatim piturin, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So here Rabbi Yehuda does not say that every tribe has to do it. He says only that Shevet has to do it. Now, of course, the question we're going to address in the Gemara is that because the Beit Din was from that Shevet, not the central Beit Din? Or is it because it was only one tribe and not 7 tribes, right? Earlier, Rabbi Yehuda talked about a majority of the tribes. Here, it's a court of a tribe, and it's only one tribe. So which one made it that, therefore, all the other tribes are patur? So we'll see in the Gemara, but right now, Rabbi Yehuda just says you only bring one karban. And the Chachamim say here that you're not going to bring anything. Ein chayavin ela al horayot beit din hagadol bilvad. You only bring karbanot based on the psak of the central Beit Din. Shnemar v'im kol adat Yisrael yishku. It means kol adat Yisrael lo adat oto shevet. It's the kol adat Yisrael, meaning the adat, the judges of all of Yisrael, not judges of one tribe. That's the long Mishnah. Now says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. Let's have a braita which will elaborate very briefly on our Mishnah before we start discussing all the other details. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan.
Who's the man? I mean, two dafim ago, we said that Reb Meir generally holds, if the Beit Din made a mistake, that Reb Meir holds that the individual is pater, but the Rabbanim hold that he's chayev. So that seems to be at odds with what we're saying here, that Reb Meir is holding these, he's machayev. There he said Reb Meir is pater.
So again, just to clarify, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but in our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir doesn't say that the individual brings the karban. The Beit Din brings the karban in our Mishnah, according to Rabbi Meir.
Well, I'm referring to the Gemara earlier, which says, I think yesterday or the day before, which says that there's a machlokas Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, that if for instance, if you have Chalev and Shuman and makes a mistake, Rabbi Meir says that he's pater, whereas the Chachamim says he or if it's a miut, if a kahal that's a miut, they would be chayiv because they're considered like an individual. So,
okay, I'm not sure. So in our Mishnah, again, the case in our Mishnah is where the Beit Din paskined and the majority of the community, and let's just say the first case in the Mishnah, the easiest one, did the avera according to what the Beit Din paskined. Rabbi Meir's opinion there is that that's what the Torah calls a par helam davar shel tzibor, and the responsibility for that par falls on the court. Now, let's continue. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Yadu Shehoru, right? Let's say Beit Din makes a psak, okay? And they paskin again, like any of the cases we've had. The Bezdin says that you're allowed to eat something you're not allowed to eat, okay? V'ta'u ma shehoru, and they made a mistake in what they made a psak, right? Meaning they made a mistake, right? And Rashi, ta'u ma shehoru means they forgot they made a mistake in what they paskin, meaning that let's say the Beit Din paskin that you're allowed to eat chalev, right? You're allowed to eat the fats that are associated with the animal. And a person not a person, most of the people forgot what Beit Din said, and they couldn't remember if Beit Din said that you're allowed to eat the fats or you're allowed to eat the blood, okay? So basically the people didn't remember the psak of Beit Din, but they remembered that Beit Din had paskin something was mutter, and the people went ahead and they did the avera, the majority of the people, according to the psak of Beit Din. You might think that in that case, you still have to bring a par helam davar shel tzibor because the majority of the tzibor did the thing wrong that Beit Din said you're allowed to do. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk says the Braita, b'noda chatat. You know about your sin, meaning that you have to be a scenario where you did the sin, you did the act that Beit Din said you're allowed to do, and you knew that Beit Din said you're allowed to do it. Not that you basically got a blanket thing from court. The sinner, the chote, knew. You have to know which sin Beit Din said you're allowed to do. Not that Beit Din said you're allowed to do one thing, you can't remember what they said, and therefore you did it. Continues the Braita. It says in the pasuk, the next words are asher chatu, right? That they sinned. What does asher chatu tell you? It tells you chatu shnei shvatim, that if two shvatim do a sin based on the judgment of Beit Din, or majority of those shvatim, then mivi'in shnei parim. Then each shevet has to bring their own par. So then in that case, you would have to bring 2 parim. Again, we'll see which opinion this is in a second. Obviously not Rebbe Meir. Chatu shlosha, if 3 tribes did the sin, right? Chatu shlosha, mivi'in shlosha, right? Then 3 tribes each brings a par, and therefore you bring 3 parim for the 3 tribes. Says Gemara, maybe that's not the way to read it. Maybe it's not referring to communities. Maybe it's referring to people. Oh, eno ella omer ella chatu shnei yichidim, maybe shnei parim. Maybe the pasuk is telling you that if 2 individuals sin, they bring 2 parim, chatu shlosha miviim shlosha, but not telling you that if 2 tribes sin, and by forgetting what Beit Din says, then they bring 2 par helm davar shel tzibor. Maybe just telling you 2 individuals bring 2, of course, like all the cases, that an individual brings their own karban. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, asher chatu hakahal, the community sinned, meaning hakahal chayav. We're talking here about the community sinning, the chol kahal b'kahal chayav. Each kahal, each individual community is chayav, ketzad. So that's how we understand what Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah. Chatu shnei shvatim, the 2 tribes, and a tribe is called a kahal. We'll see where we get that from in a minute. Then meviim shnei parim. Chatu shiv'a, if let's say 7 tribes, which now becomes the majority of the tribes sin, meviim shiva parim, then I added the word parim, meviim shiva, then you bring 7, right? The Braita continues, where am I? Mevi'in Shiva. Vishar Shvatim, and the other tribes that didn't sin, well, in the case where there were 7, then according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we said in the Mishnah, Mevi'in Ayidein Par. Each other tribe brings a par. Sha'afilo elo shlochatu mevi'in alachotim. That even the ones who didn't sin have to bring because of those who did sin. Lekach nemer kahal, and that's why it says an extra time the word kahal. The chayev al kol kahal v'kahal, to tell you that it's not one karban like Rabbi Meir said for all of Klal Yisrael. And it's not one karban for everyone. It's chayev. Each community brings their own karban, and community means a shevet. Give Rabbi Yehuda. So that is Rabbi Yehuda. Just a very small elaboration on what he said in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, and this is a Braita elaborating on our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, we're, I don't know, somewhere in the middle, like 10 lines from the last narrow line. Shiv'a shvatim shechatu, if 7 tribes sinned based on the judgment of Beit Din, mivi'in shiva parim. I agree with you, Rabbi Yehuda, that each tribe brings its own par. And, says Rabbi Shimon, I add one, because Beit Din mivi'in ayidein par. Beit Din itself has to bring a separate par, not only each shevet, but also the Beit Din. Well, how do I know that? Shenemar lamata kahal, because it says in the next case, further down, which means the next psukim really, it says the word kahal. V'nemar lemala kahal, and above it says kahal. Ma kahal amor lemala, Beit Din ima kahal. Just like the kahal said before, said me einei ha'ida, which, the einei, of course, is the judges, the Beit Din, is referring to the Beit Din ima kahal. Af kahal amor lamata, so too, and it says kahal further down. It talks about bringing the karban, Beit Din ima kahal. Beit Din has to bring a karban with the kahal. So that is Rabbi Shimon's drush. Rabbi Meir says, this is out of order, but it's the same opinion in the Mishnah. I disagree. Shiv'a shvatim shechatu. Let's say you have 7 tribes that sin based on the ruling of Beit Din. Then there is a karban, but it's one karban, and it's brought by Beit Din. Beit Din mivi'in ayidein par, v'hein paturim. Beit Din brings a par, but everybody else is patur because the individuals don't bring a karban. And that is because, says Rabbi Meir, Nemar kahal lamata, v'nemar kahal lamala. It says kahal further down by the karban. It says kahal further up by the judgment. Ma kahal amor lemala Beit Din v'lo tzibor. Just like in the mistake of psak, the psak comes from the Beit Din. The psak does not come from the individuals. So just like the kahal, it says lamala is referring to the Beit Din and not the tzibor. Af kahal amor lamata, when it's referring to the karban, is Beit Din v'lo tzibor. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Now says the Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar were the third to last narrow line. A fourth opinion. So we had Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Meir. We introduce now a fourth Tana, which is similar. We'll see why. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishmo. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said in the name of him, meaning of Rabbi Meir, who we just quoted, that I actually, just to be clear, this is not just 7 tribes that are a majority. Even if it's Chatu Shisha Shvatim, even if 6 tribes sin, which is not a majority, but the people in the 6 tribes represent Hein Ruban Shel Kahal, they are a majority of Klal Yisrael. O Shiva, or 7 tribes, Afal B'Sheino Ruban Shel Kahal, even if they're not a majority, because they're small population tribes, then Mivi'in Par. So then you bring a par. We'll see in the Gemara, Rabbi Meir disagrees or not disagrees, but this is Rabbi Shimon's ben Elazar's explanation of Rabbi Meir. You only bring one, but it has to be a majority, and a majority can either be a majority in numbers or a majority in number of tribes. Okay, now that is the long Braita that explains our Mishnah. Says the Gemara now, the first wide line on Daf Hey Amud Aleph, Amar Mar. Says the Gemara, let us analyze this Braita. The Braita says, V'nodah chatat, you have to know about the sin that you did wrong. V'lo she'yivadah chotim, not that you know that people did a sin wrong. What does that mean? Mantana, who is the Tana of this Braita? Amar Rav Yudah, Marav, Yitema Rava, that's against Rabbi Eliezer. That's against Rabbi Eliezer. It's not because we have a Mishnah in where's the Mishnah? The Mishnah, sorry, let me find that. Where my sugya Mishnah is, it says here it's Titania, but it's in Kritut, okay? The Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Manavshach, Im chelav achal chayav, notar achal chayav. It says Rabbi Eliezer, if let's say, right, a person, this is talking about a case, where basically a person ate something that was inappropriate, but he didn't know if what he ate was chelav or what he ate was notar, right? Meaning, it was prohibited either way, but he didn't know at the time that he ate it whether the thing was prohibited to him because it was chelev or whether the thing was prohibited to him because it was notar. So then there's a machloket about whether you bring a korban for that. And Rabbi Eliezer says you bring a korban because it doesn't matter whether what you did was wrong because it was chelev or whether what you did was wrong was because it was notar. What you did is chayav a korban, and therefore you bring a korban. You don't need to know exactly which sin, which of course is not the same as what we just explained in our Braita, which is that Beit Din made a psak. And Beit Din said, you're allowed to eat this meat. And the people forgot whether Beit Din said you're allowed to eat meat that's chelev or you're allowed to eat meat that's, say, dam, has dam in it. And they ate the thing, and they didn't know at the time they did it what psak Beit Din gave. They don't bring a korban, or you don't bring a par helam davar shel tzibor. Because par helam davar shel tzibor is only when you know what Beit Din paskin. Rabbi Eliezer here is saying you bring a korban chatat as an individual, even if you don't know exactly what your mistake was. Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi Amar, it's not necessarily the same thing. The tzibor, the par helam davar, could be different than the individual chatat. Afilu tema Rabbi Eliezer. This Braita could even be going according to Rabbi Eliezer, because shani hacha, because it's different by a par helam davar shel tzibor. Because there it says the words asher chatu aleha. They sinned on it, meaning you have to know what the thing is that you sinned about. So if you don't know what the court said, then you are patur. Hatanami asmar, but by an individual chatat, it also is chtiv asher chata ba. It says you sinned with it. So you have to know what it is. That's true, but that's for a different purpose. That is telling you that you don't bring a korban chatat if you're mitasek. Mitasek, if you recall, we had this by Shabbat a lot. Mitasek is, let's say you go and there's like a vase and there's a flower in the vase. You say, I want to pick up the flower. And it turns out that the bottom of the vase had a hole in it and the flower was connected to the earth, right? So by picking up the flower, you uprooted it from the earth. Right, but that's called mitasek because you did not intend to do what you did. You did not intend to uproot a flower. Right, you thought you were picking up. So there, you're patur by an individual because it has to be the sin that you meant to do. And so therefore, the pasuk is used for that. It's not there to tell you anything about intention, and therefore you are chayav according to Rabbi Eliezer by an individual, but patur by a tzibor. Okay, and that is the first thing. Says the Gemara, now let's go into more detail. My time with Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda gave his reason in the Braita, but let us understand it a little deeper. What's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda? Because Rabbi Yehuda says that the word in the pasuk of par helam davar shel tzibor, it says the word ha-kahal twice. And we learned 4 things from that, because it says the word kahal, so kahal is 2, each one is 1. The hey is extra. Ha-kahal tells you 4, 2 times 2. Kasavar arba kahalik TV. It says the word kahal 4 times because it says kahal and hakahal, meaning one word, but it's an extra hey. And it says kahal, hakahal. So 2 times the word kahal, and each time it has a hey. So why do we four things? So first one says Rabbi Yehuda Chad l'chayav kol kahal v'kahal. The first is to tell you that you're chayav every community. Every shevet is its own community, and every shevet brings its own karban. That's one. One is to tell you that, of course, the psak has to come from the Beit Din, but the action has to come from the Gal, meaning that it's not that the court has to do the thing, they paskin and they eat the food, it's that the community does it. Chad the Grira. One is for this principle that even if a nation, 7 shvatim do it, and the other 5 don't, the other 5 also bring a karban because they're dragged along with the majority. That's the third. And Chad l'shevet shasam arat Beit Din. And the fourth is the new halacha, that it's not just a central Beit Din, it's even a communal Beit Din. So if a shevet's Beit Din makes a psak and that shevet does it, they also bring a parhel and davar shel tzibur. So that's why you have 4 kahals. Rabbi Shimon says, wait a second, only 3 count. Tlata kahalik TV. I only think 3 of them are notable because it says hakahal the first time, and it says kahal hakahal. But when it says me'enei hakahal, the first one basically, orche dekrahu. That hey is not considered to be very notable because it's the way people speak. Kadamri inchi me'enei depalnaya. People talk about, you had the eyes of so-and-so, meaning the ha is not extra. It's a normal way to speak. And therefore, you only have 3 extra words of kahal. And that is to tell you, first of all, chad d'chayav kol kahal v'kahal. The first one, he agrees to Rabbi Yehuda that every shevet is chayav its own karban, unlike Rabbi Meir. The trei achrini, the other 2 kahals, are there to tell you a gzera shava, a hekesh, sorry. Nemar lemata kahal, v'nemar lemala kahal, as we said in the Braita. It says kahal below, meaning when it talks about the karban. It says kahal above when it talks about the psak, the judgment. Malahalan, beitin im kahal. Just like when you make the judgment, you have to have the Beit Din, otherwise there's no judgment. So too the karban is brought with the Beit Din, with the kahal, meaning the community brings a karban, and the Beit Din brings its own separate karban. And Rabbi Meir says to you, I don't even think this whole hey means anything. Kahal hakahal lo darshi. I don't darshan the extra hakahal. Hilkach trei kahalik TV. It only says the word kahal twice, and I need that to tell you. It says lower down by karban kahal. It says it further up. Just like the psak, the judgment is from the court. Right? The courts make the psak, not the individual. So too by the korban, it's the court and not the tzibor. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the 4th opinion in the Braita, which was an opinion of Rabbi Meir, my taima. Why does he say that you bring a korban for a majority of the tribes or a majority of the people? Because it says, Haya im me'enei ha'edah. It says, if some of the Eidah, right? May means from a portion of the Eidah, sin. Alma miyuta. You see, sometimes you bring a par, even if it's not a majority of the people, right? May einei, some of the eyes of the people. And then, of course, then it says at the end, because the whole nation did it wrong, which implies that everybody did it. Only all the people. How do you reconcile that? Haketzad. So the way you reconcile that is that sometimes a minority brings it if they're a majority of the tribes. And sometimes it's only a majority because it's depending on the majority of the people. Meaning, Asu Shisha, if 6 Shvatim made a mistake and they are a rove of 6 Shvatim, Behin Ruban Shel Kahal, then you bring a karban. O Shiva, or 7 tribes, Alpha Bishan and Ruban Shel Kahal, Chayavim. So that is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's interpretation. Turn the page to Daf Hey Amud Bet. Ask the Gemara on the top of Daf Hey Amud Bet, what about Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir, who don't have the extra 3rd or 4th limud, how do they know that Horayot how do they know that the psak has to be given by the Beit Din and the actions have to be done by the people in the Menalahu? Amar Abaye says Abaye Amar Krab, because the pasuk says V'im me'enei ha'edah nesta lishkaga. It says in the pasuk me'enei ha'edah nesta lishkaga, which means, Rashi explains, that basically you are relying on the Beit Din to do the thing wrong, meaning you're doing it me'enei ha'edah. So that's how you know people didn't just make a mistake because they forgot that you can't keep kosher or they thought this wasn't meat. It's because of the psak of the Beit Din that they made the mistake. Rava says, I have a similar interpretation, which is from a different pasuk, because the pasuk says, two psukim later, L'chol ha'am bishkaga, that all of the people do this bishkaga, which implies, L'chol ha'am implies that everyone's doing it, not because each individual made a mistake, but because someone told them, and therefore they made a mistake. It says, now, in fact, you need both interpretations of Abaya and Rava. If it said that you did it because of the psak of the Beit Din, I would have thought of it. You don't need everyone to do it. Meaning, if anybody made a mistake based on the judgment of Beit Din, you would bring a karban, a paralam davar. You might have thought of even a small number. Therefore, it says all of the people. Now, if it only had the second pasuk of Rava, I would have thought that means everyone, including the Beit Din. That it means everybody, meaning a majority of people, but the Beit Din has to be part of that majority. Therefore, the pasuk said Beit Din doesn't have to do the act at all. It's the people who do it based on the judgment of Beit Din, meaning that Beit Din gives the psak. All the people, which we interpreted 2 days ago as most of the people, do the act. Then you're chayav b'par helam davar shel tzibur. Says Gemara, that's a really nice drasha from Abai and Rava, but these psukim are not written by par helam davar shel tzibur. Hakitiva hani kroi b'avodah zarah u'tichtivi. These psukim are written by the sin of avodah zarah, where everybody makes a mistake in avodah zarah. And remember, there you bring a par and a sa'ir. This Gemara, you're right. But yalfina me'ene. But we derive similar rules by avodah zarah and by regular karbanot, and therefore we can learn one from the other, and we learn the rules from one to the other. Okay, so that gets us up to the 2 dots. Says the Gemara, the 2 dots now on Daf Hey.
How do we decide regarding?
Sorry,
how do we? What is see, earlier in the Gemara it mentioned it discusses a kamiflagi. Rav Papa brings a kamiflagi saying that is the Beit Din considered part of the kahal or not, and he brings the Tuman de Omrim. So have we come to a conclusion of that? I don't remember that the Gemara brought a conclusion there.
So I think there's several. So this is not going to resolve that. But just to be clear, remember there was a question about whether Beit Din is there for the majority, right? Remember, if you had everyone did it like one less than a majority of Bnei Yisrael, and then Beit Din, would they add to that majority? But what Rav and Abai are both claiming here, which is I think again a mainstream opinion, though there could be others who argue, is that when we say a majority of people do it, it does not need to include Beit Din. The question before was whether Beit Din could be included in adding to that majority. But this is not referring to that same discussion. This is just saying that what you need is a majority of the people, and it does not need to include Beit Din in that majority. Meaning, if Beit Din, no one on Beit Din did the sin, and 90% of Klal Yisrael did it, you'd bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. It does not require part of Beit Din, which is what you would have thought had you only had one of these 2 psukim. Okay, says the Gemara now. If you are Horo Beit Din shel achad min hashvatim, right? One of the tribes, Paskin, you bring a karban. Tashma. Now says the Gemara, what do they bring, right? Let's say one tribe has a judgment that says you're not allowed to, you're allowed to eat sort of fats, let's say from a certain animal, and most of that tribe or all of that tribe did that thing wrong. It says the Mishnah, they bring a karban. Ma'im miviyim. What do they bring? Says the Gemara in Parachad. What do you mean? Sorry, did I skip some words? I got a little, I think, sorry, I went a little ahead of us. Ibayla, says Gemara, before I went ahead, we had a question. Shevet echad Rabbi Yehuda barat Beit Din Agadol mimayti shar shvatim alo. Right? Remember, our Mishnah said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is confusing, so if I say it wrong, correct me, please. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, if 7 shvatim do a sin, according to the Beit Din Agadol, then those 7 shvatim each bring a par, and the other 5 have to bring one also, right? Because, let's say, because it's a majority. However, the Mishnah then concluded and said, if one tribe's court said that they're allowed to do it, and that tribe did it wrong, only that tribe brings the par, nobody else. The question is that because it's only one tribe and not 7 tribes? Or is it because it was a psak of the Beit Din of that tribe and not a psak of the Beit Din HaGadol? So ask the Gemara, let's resolve that question. That's exactly our question now. If one tribe did it according to Rabbi Yehuda, but it was on the Horah, not of that tribe's Beit Din, but of the Beit Din HaGadol. So then, mi maiti shar shvatim olo. Do other tribes have to bring a karban or not? Do you say, mi amrinan, shiva shvatim hudamaiti shar shvatim badai, when you have 7 tribes who do something wrong, then the other shvatim have to bring it, mishum de'ika ruba, because that's a majority of the people. Avachad shevet, if it's only one tribe, even based on the psak of the Beit Din HaGadol, the leka ruba lo, odima lo shna, or maybe there's no difference. So tashma, so let's try to prove it from the following braita. Says the following braita, mahim mivi'im, what karban do you bring if the Beit Din of one tribe makes a psak and the people do the thing wrong? Says the braita, mahim mivi'im, par echad. This is what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in the Mishnah. You bring 1 par. Rabbi Shimon says, no, shnei parim, you bring 2. Now, b'mayaskina, what's the case, right? How many tribes have sinned in this example in the braita? Ilei meshchatu shiva. If there's 7 tribes that sinned, obviously it's not the case because Rabbi Shimon timnaya bay. Then Rabbi Shimon should say 8 because 7 for the 7 tribes and 1 for Beit Din. Ella, it must be the chata shevet echad. We're talking about a case where 1 tribe sinned. Now, who paskin for the tribe? B'mai. Who was the Beit Din? Ibehorat Beit Dino. If it was the own tribe's Beit Din that paskin, remember in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon said you don't bring korban at all if it's the private Beit Din of that tribe. So then let the light. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold you bring a korban. Elalav, it must be the Braita is referring to a case of Hora'at Beit Din HaGadol. The Beit Din HaGadol said, you're allowed to eat this thing. 1 tribe went ahead and did it. And then our Braita says, according to the Tanakama, you bring 1 par. According to Rabbi Shimon, you bring 2. Now, who is the Tanakama? Tanakama money. Who is the Tanakama? If it's Rabbi Meir says 1 tribe, you never bring a karban at all. Rubabai. Rabbi Meir Rubabai. Elav Rabbi Yehuda. Elkegon Shchata Sheven Echad. The case here seems to be, Beit Din HaGadol said you're allowed to eat the thing. 1 tribe goes ahead and does it. Rabbi Yehuda says you bring 1 karban. Rabbi Shimon says you bring 2, 1 for the tribe and 1 for the court. So you proved your case here. Every other tribe does not have to bring a karban. Amri says the Gemara, that's not necessarily a proof. Because Hacham Mayaskin in the case here might be referring to not 1 tribe. I'm sorry, not Rabbi Yehuda. It might be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you don't bring a karban if 1 tribe sins. It might be a case, Kigon Shechatu Shisha Shvatim. 6 tribes sin, so it's not a majority of tribes, but Hein Ruban Shakal, but they're most of the people. And it's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Am Mishmo, Chatu Shisha Hein Ruban Shakal, or Shiva, Alfabish Hein Ruban Shakal Meviin Par. They bring 1 par, and that's the Tanakama. Says Gemara, okay, so that might be the case. But according to Rabbi Shimon, why do you only bring 2? Because Rabbi Shimon only holds that you bring for a majority of the tribe, for each tribe, if it's a majority of the tribes, meaning 7 tribes. But in a case where it's 6 tribes, so it's less than a majority, then Rabbi Shimon says you only bring 1 karban for the people and 1 karban for the Beit Din. So that could be the case. Now we're going to see in a minute it's not, but this is one way we can push off this braita. Tashma. Okay, come and learn the next braita. What are we up to? The first wide line, 4th last word on the line. Says the braita.
It would seem to be if you hold strictly that it's 1 tribe, not 6. You try and interpret it as 6, but if it's 1 tribe truly, then from the first Mishnah in the Masechta, it would be like an individual and they would be pater because it's Beit Din who made the mistake.
So that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that opinion. That was our Mishnah today. The Rabbi Meir's opinion is that if it's a minority of the people, then the individuals have to bring a karban. They're not, well, it's machloket, but you don't bring a par helm davar shel tzibur, right? No karban. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you do not need to have a majority of the people. You only need to have a majority of each tribe, and that tribe is then chayav. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion.
Right, but that's still a majority. It's a rove of something, so that
Right.
if there's no row, if you hold to that is 1 tribe, for instance, and there's not the 6 that you want to interpret it, then wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda be maskim that there would be no that tribe wouldn't have to bring a korban?
No, Rabbi Yehuda holds that each tribe is its own entity. So any tribe that has a majority that sins, the tribe brings a korban. If it's 3 shvatim, they bring 3. The question of majority comes out only according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says if it's not a majority, you don't bring it. And the machloket that we just quoted is, how do you define majority? Could it be 6 tribes that have most of the people, or 7 tribes without most of the people? Rabbi Shimon's opinion is very, very unique. And I'm saying it, we haven't yet unpacked the whole thing. We'll get there tomorrow.
You just said 3. You said example, there could be 3 tribes, right?
Right. So 3 tribes, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you'd bring 3 karbanot. According to Rabbi Shimon, this is where Rabbi Shimon gets very interesting. Rabbi Shimon says if it's less than a majority, then you bring 1 karban for all the people. So if it's 3 tribes, you would bring 1 karban between the 3 tribes, plus 1 karban for the court. So Rabbi Shimon always says there's a karban for the Beit Din, and that's 1. And the individuals depend on whether it's a majority or a minority. If it's a majority of the tribes, let's say 8 tribes, then each tribe brings a karban. And there's 8 karbanot for the tribes and 1 for the court. If it's 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6, then you just bring 1. So it's 1 if it's a minority, plus 1 for the court. And it's for each tribe if it's a majority, plus 1 for the court, which is why
if there's 1 tribe, that tribe would bring it?
Correct. According to Rabbi Shimon, they'd bring 2. The tribe would bring and the court would bring.
Yeah, okay, but not Reb Meir, he wouldn't
Rabbi
hold
Meir
that.
says no, tribes never bring. According to Rabbi Meir, people never bring a karban. It's only the courts that bring. The people never bring a karban.
Well, because right, but let's say according to Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, but let's say it's 1 person. Would he still hold that person has to bring a karban?
No, only a tribe, only a kahal. Tashma. So let's read this brighter now. Again, the end of the first line. I know it's late. We're going to do this bright. It's pretty fast. Don't worry. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shevet asab arat beitino. Let's say a shevet does something wrong according to the psak of its own beitin. Says Rabbi Yehuda, Oto shevet chayav. That tribe has to bring a karban, 1 karban. Shar kol shvatim pturim. Everyone else is patur. But if horat beitin agadol, if you did it based on the central court, then Oto shevet chayav. Where am I? That afilu shar shvatim chayavim. All the other tribes are also chayav. Shma mina. So you see clearly from here, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if the central court makes a psak and 1 tribe does it wrong, every other tribe has to bring a karban because there's communal responsibility. Says Rav Ashi, matnita namideka. In fact, the Mishnah seems to indicate this. The Ketani, because our Mishnah said that if 1 Beit Din gave a psak for its own tribe, the shevet did it based on their psak. Now, why do you have to tell me that the other shvatim are patur? You just said that shevet is chayav. I can read. I would know that shevet is chayav. All the other shvatim are patur. The chiddush of the Mishnah and adding those words was the only reason the other places are other shvatim are patur is not because it was only 1 tribe. It's because it was a psak of that Beit Din. Because it was the private Beit Din, the other shvatim are paturin. So you can prove from here that in fact, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you have this principle of greira, of pulling along other people, even if only 1 tribe does it, as long as the psak came from the Beit Din HaGadol. Now, Iboy says the Gemara, okay, that is the psak of Rabbi Yehuda. But what does Rabbi Shimon think? Shevet echad she'asav arat Beit Din HaGadol, the Rabbi Shimon, mi maiti olo. Does Rabbi Shimon say that if 1 tribe does it, so not a majority, but the tribe does it based on the Beit Din HaGadol, do they bring a karban or not? So Tashma, let's now read the Braita. The Braita, this is a Braita we quoted before. It said, Mahim Mivi'in. What do they bring? What karban? They bring par echad. They bring 1 par. Now remember, we don't know yet who's they, what happened, how many people, who gave the psak. But the Braita says they bring 1 par. And Shimon says, Shnei parim. They bring 2 parim. Now, b'may askinan, I don't get it. What's the case? If you're talking about where a majority of the tribes sin, so 7 tribes sin, so then what do you mean Rabbi Shimon says you bring 2? Shnei parim, question mark. Shmona parim ba, you should need 8. Because Rabbi Shimon very clearly in our Mishnah said that if 7 tribes sin, you bring 7 karbanot for the tribes and 1 for the Beit Din. So it should be 8. Ella, the case here must be shechata shevet echad. Only 1 tribe sinned. Now, if 1 tribe sinned, who told them that they can do this? B'mai, who was the Beit Din? Ilema b'horat beit dino, if it was the personal beit din of that tribe, remember Rabbi Shimon says you don't bring a korban at all in that case. Let's like Ella, it must be b'horat beit din hagadol. It must be that the case here is that the beit din hagadol said the beit din hagadol said that you can eat chelev. One tribe went ahead and did it, and Rabbi Shimon says you bring two korbanot, one for that tribe and one for the court. That's a great explanation, but who's the Tanakama then? But Tizbara, how could you explain it that way? Tanakama money. Who is the Tanakama who says you bring one? If it's Rabbi Meir says if one Shevet does it, you don't bring one karban, you bring nothing. Haruba boy, you need everyone or a majority. Rabbi Yehuda, you just explained Rabbi Yehuda is saying Shar Shvatim Nami Maiti, that if the Beit Din HaGadol gives the psak and one tribe does it wrong, every tribe has to bring a karban. So it's not one, it's 12. Elahamani, the case must be Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Tanya, it must be the case of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, like we said in the Braita before, right? And so, as we said earlier, right, that the case of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was where you had 6 shvatim that did it. They were a minority of the people. So according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, in Rabbi Meir, that although it's 6 shvatim that are a majority, or 7 shvatim that are a minority, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Meir, that's enough to be called a majority. Okay, Tashma, let's bring one more proof today, which is a case we just had earlier.
How can you hold that Rabbi Yehuda says that even if it's one tribe, all the rest of them have to bring it? The Gemara earlier in Daf Gimel talks about cases where people are Medinat Yam. They don't even know about this. They're not. So they didn't even know that something happened. They didn't know what Beit Din can't even communicate with them. So these people would be putter in those situations because there's no way to reach them. So let's say you got 12 tribes and 4 of them are in, they're not even in Eretz Yisrael, they're in Babel, whatever it may be. So how could you obligate them to bring something according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda if they didn't even know about it?
I'm not sure I understand the question. They don't have to know about it. Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayav even if you don't know about it.
I don't know how that could be because the Gemara says earlier that if someone didn't know about it, it brings other cases. A person didn't know, then they wouldn't be. He's patur from it. So
that's patur for his own action. Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayav for somebody else's action here. And you're mixing up things. The discussion earlier was about whether an individual has responsibility for a judgment that they don't know about. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah is saying that if Shevet Ruvain does a sin, Shevet Shimon has to bring a karban, not because Shevet Shimon did something wrong, because Ruvain did something wrong. It has nothing to do with knowing about it or not. It's somehow you're atoning for the rest of Bnei Yisrael for the sin that they did.
So let's say they're in Chutz La'aretz. There's no way to contact them. When
eventually you can't bring it if you don't know about it, you can't do it. But once
correctly,
correct.
That's what I'm saying. So
eventually they're going to find out, right?
Is there? Let's see, 10 years from now. I mean, what the parameter?
I don't think there's a time limit, but Tashma. Let's do this last case. There's a parentheses. We're one line above it. Says the bright. Sorry, is that the Tashma? No, it's not what I'm up to. Tashma. Sorry.
Chachamim omrim.
Thank you. Chachamim omrim. Thank you, Miriam. These are very hard dapim. Says the Braita. Chachamim omrim la'olam eno chayav ela al rat beit din hagadol. You're only chayav. This was the end of our Mishnah on the judgment of the beit din hagadol. Naman chachamim. Who are these chachamim? Ilem Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you're not chayav because it's beit din hagadol. You're not chayav because it's not a majority. It's only one tribe. Then Rubabai. Elalav Rabbi Shimoni Shmamina. In fact, it's Rabbi Shimon, and you prove from here that Rabbi Shimon holds that if a Beit Din of one tribe makes a psak, you're patur. It's only the Beit Din Hagadol. Now says the Gemara. Let's just finish today. I know this is very late, but it's going to take only 5 minutes, less than that. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who both say, right, unlike Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that you need a majority of the congregation. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said you only need a majority of a tribe. How do you know that one tribe is called kahal? Shevet echad deikri kahal minali. How do you know that one tribe is called a kahal? Because it's based on the very crazy story at the end of Divrei Yamim when they had a big fight. Remember, Yoshafat had partnered with Achav. Achav died in battle, and then all these people came to attack them. And it says, "Vayamod Yoshafat bekal Yehuda v'Yushalayim bebeit Hashem." The Masorah Shas changes the girsa to the correct one. Lifnei chatzar chadasha. The Kahal of Yehuda stood in front of Chatzer Chadasha. Now, first the Gemara asks, what do you mean it's the new courtyard? Like Chadasha, says Rabbi Yochanan, this is a Gemara elsewhere, Shechidshu Dvarim Bamru, there was a Chidush in Halacha, and they said Tful Yom Ay Kanes the Machane Leviyah, that Tful Yom should not go even, not just into the Machane Kuna, but a Tful Yom shouldn't go into the Machane Leviyah. But either way, the point from the pasuk is that it's called Kahal Yehuda. That's not a great proof. How can you prove it from there? Remember, Yerushalayim was not just the chelik of Yehuda; it was the whole Nachla of Binyamin, right? Remember, that was the whole point of Yerushalayim, was smack down the middle. So Dilma Shani Yerushalayim Davinami Binyamin. So how do you know a shevet is a kahal? Maybe you need two shvatim. El Amar Rav Yaakov Dichtiv. It's based on the pasuk in way back in Breshit, when it says, Yomer Eli Hinini Yaakov is telling Yosef, right, about the promise he got. Hashem said to me, Hinini Mafricha V'Herbeticha V'Nataticha L'Kahal Amim. I will make you into a Kahal Amim. Now, of course, at that point, Yaakov already had 11 kids. He only had one more to come. Right? Man it Hishaita Binyamin. The only one who was born after that time was Binyamin. And you see that Hashem said, you're going to get a kahal. Shema Mina, Achi Amar Achmana. This is what Hashem said to him. Mityalein Lecha Hashta Kahal Achmina. You'll have another kahal. You see, one shevet is a kahal. Amalei Rav Shavala Rav Kahana. What do you mean? Maybe what Hashem was saying to Yaakov was, Dilma, Hachi Kamar Le Rachmana. Lechi Mityalein Lecha Binyamin. Once you give birth to Binyamin and you have your full cohort of 12 sons, maybe Hashem was saying to him, right, that once you have your other son, Binyamin, you'll have 12 and then you'll be a kahal. Said to him, that can't be the case. Would you then learn from there that only 12 shvatim are kahal, 11 are not kahal? That's clearly not the case. We just learned from Kahal Yehuda that Yerushalayim is called a kahal and has a maximum of 2 shvatim. So you see that you don't need 12 to be a kahal, and therefore the pasuk can't be saying to Yaakov, once you have one more, you'll have a kahal. So what is the pasuk saying to Yaakov? It's saying your next child will be a kahal. And so you see from there that
it's like 8-9 children.
You see from there that each shevet is called a kahal, and therefore Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda say that when the Torah says if a kahal sins, it means one shevet that sins.
Benjamin had the largest family, though, right? He had about 8-9 children.
I mean, a lot of children, but he didn't have a lot of. I mean, he wasn't the largest in population when we count them up, right? It's not kids that matter; it's descendants that matter. But
with all this, I mean, wasn't it the largest one with all the?
It was the most children, but when you count them in Bamidbar, it was not the largest by far. The Yosef was much bigger. Shimon was much bigger. Yehuda was much bigger. I don't remember if Ruvain was bigger or not, but there were at least several that were much bigger. Okay, we're going to stop here. I know these are very long dapim, but God willing, I hope everyone's wide awake tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. so that we can continue with what slightly shorter daf. Shavua Tov. We'll hope to see everyone tomorrow.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Right.
Shavua Tov. Yasher Koach.